Hey everyone, in this video we'll learn how to solve higher degree polynomial equations. So up until this point we've been solving a lot of quadratic equations. So quadratic equations are equations where the highest degree is 2, so something like x squared plus 7x plus 6 equals 0. It's something that can be written in the form ax squared plus bx plus c. We've been learning how to solve a lot of those types of equations up until this point. And in this video, we'll go ahead and solve some higher degree polynomial equations together. So let's go through an example. Let's say we had 10x to the power of 4 minus 40x squared equals 0. So it depends. For equations like these, we can actually factor this by pulling out the greatest common factor, the GCF. So the GCF, and let's go ahead and start factoring this. So what is the GCF of both of these terms? Well, let's take a look at the coefficients first, 10 and negative 40. So what are the factors, or what's the highest factor of both of these numbers? Well, 10 happens to be the highest factor of both of these numbers because 10 goes into 10 once. 10 divided by 10 is 1. And negative 40 divided by 10 is negative 4. So 10 goes into 44 times. So 10 is the greatest common factor. And now looking at the variables x to the fourth and x to the second, so x to the fourth and x to the second, the greatest common factor there is x to the second. X to the second goes into x to the fourth twice, and x squared goes into x squared just once. So we can write x squared, and when we factor, we set up our parentheses, and let's go ahead and divide each term by what we factored. So let's divide each term by our greatest common factor, 10x squared. So this divided by 10x squared, and this divided by 10x squared. So what is 10x to the fourth divided by 10x squared? Well, the 10 and the 10 cancel out. And what's x to the fourth divided by x squared? So according to the quotient rule, that is simply just x to the power of 4 minus 2, and 4 minus 2 is just 2, so this is just x squared. Great. Now the second term. What is negative 40 over 10? So negative 40 over 10 is negative 4. We've dealt with the coefficients, negative 40 over 10, so that's negative 4. So negative 40 over 10. And now let's deal with the x's. What's x squared over x squared? So those actually cancel out. So we actually just have x squared minus 4 inside the parentheses. So factored, this is 10x squared times, in parentheses, x squared minus 4 equals 0. Great. So now that we have it in factored form, we can actually go ahead, because we're multiplying two terms and they equal 0. See, we're multiplying a 10x squared by a binomial. So we're multiplying these two, and we're getting 0. So very similar to when we factor quadratics and we solve them that way, we can go ahead and split this up into two separate equations. So we'll have 10x squared equals 0 on one side, and we'll have x squared minus 4 equals, so x squared minus 4 equals 0 on the other side. And let's go ahead and solve both of these separately. So 10x squared equals 0. Let's just solve for x. So let's divide both sides by 10. We have x squared equals 0 divided by 10, which is 0. And let's go ahead and take the square root of both sides. That square root will cancel out the square. And we have x equals the square root of 0, and the square root of 0 is just 0. So we have one solution for x so far. X equals 0. Perfect. Now, let's solve the equation on the right. Let's go ahead and add 4 to both sides. So we have x squared equals 4. And now to finally isolate x, we'll take the square root of both sides. So the square root of both sides, that square root will cancel out the x. And if we just scroll down, x equals, and again, this is very important. In any equation, when we are taking the square root of both sides, we have to include that plus minus. Now, you might ask why we didn't include the plus minus for the 0 in the other equation. So let's just put plus minus radical 4. And the reason is because over here on this side, so if we just go down a little bit, okay, so let's just move this and let's move that as well. We technically should include a plus minus here, but it doesn't make any difference. Plus minus 0 is still 0. So plus minus 0 is still 0. So whenever you're taking the square root of 0, it doesn't make a difference. But any other number, when you're taking the square root, especially in an equation, when you take the radical of both sides, you must include that plus minus. So x equals plus minus radical 4. And what does radical 4 evaluate to? That is 2. And then you can go ahead and split this up. X equals plus minus 2. And that simply means x equals positive 2, which I'll just write as 2. That's one solution. And x equals negative 2. And we actually have 3 solutions for x. We have x equals 0, x equals 2, and x equals negative 2. And those are all the solutions to our original problem. 10x to the 4th minus 40x squared equals 0. So there are some higher degree polynomials, such as this one where the degree was 4 right here. It's a 4th degree polynomial. There are some where you can go ahead and factor, in this case by taking the greatest common factor, the GCF, and then solving for x that way. And in addition to that, there are some polynomials that you can solve by factoring, by grouping. So one example, let's say we have x to the 3rd power plus x squared minus 16x. So minus 16x minus 16 equals 0. Now, we may not be able to factor the entire polynomial, but we can factor parts of it. We can factor just these two, and we can factor just these two. So let's make that a different color. We can factor both of these, and let's try to factor the ones underlined in blue. So x to the 3rd plus x squared. What is the GCF, the greatest common factor between these? So the greatest common factor is x squared, because x squared goes into x to the 3rd, 1.5 times, and then x squared goes into x squared once. So we can go ahead and set up our parentheses, and then divide each term. So what's x to the 3rd over x squared? That is just x. And what's x squared over x squared? That's just 1, positive 1. And just to show you what that would look like, divide both sides by, or divide each term by x squared, our greatest common factor. And what's x to the 3rd over x squared? That's x to the 3 minus 2, which is 1, which is simply just x. And then over here, x squared over x squared, anything divided by itself is 1. So we have x squared times x plus 1. And now let's do the green underline. What is the greatest common factor of negative 16x and negative 16? Well, they both have the same coefficient of 16, so we can pull that right out. And they don't have the same variable. I mean, this negative 16 doesn't have any variable x over here, so we can just pull out a negative 16. Let's set up our parentheses, and then go ahead and factor that. What is negative 16x divided by negative 16? Well, the negative 16s on the top and bottom would cancel out, so we're just left with the x. And same thing over here. What is negative 16 over negative 16? That is just positive 1, so plus 1. And we're getting closer to factoring this by grouping. All we have to do is now factor the x plus 1 out of these. So let's factor the x plus 1 out of them. And then we are left with these terms, x squared minus 16 equals 0. And we're very close. So our next step here, we have something times something else equals 0. So we can split this up and have each of these factors be 0. So x plus 1 equals 0, and x squared minus 16 equals 0. And let's solve each one. X plus 1 equals 0. We'll subtract 1 from both sides. And we have x equals negative 1, so that's one solution. X is negative 1. And now right here on the other side, we have x squared minus 16 equals 0. Let's add 16 to both sides. So add 16 to both sides. And we have x squared equals 16. And we're going to take the square root of both sides. So let me actually just make that blue just to make that consistent. Take the square root of both sides. And that square root will cancel out the squared. So we have x equals, and again, we just took the square root in an equation of both sides. So don't forget that plus minus. So plus minus radical 16. And what's radical 16 evaluate to? That is 4. So we can just write x equals plus minus 4. And we can go ahead and split this up. So x equals positive 4 and x equals negative 4. So those are our three solutions. X is negative 1, x is 4, and x is negative 4. And that's how we solve that polynomial that we started with, this third degree polynomial right here, where the highest exponent is 3. And we had to solve this by factoring, and we factored it by grouping. So in general, that's how you solve higher degree polynomials. You want to try to figure out a way to factor it. And then once you have it factored, and then you have it in factored form, and then it equals 0, you can go ahead and split each factor, make both of them equal 0, and then solve for x on each side. And then you'll come up with your solutions for x. So that's how you do it for higher degree polynomials. I hope this video helps, and if you have any questions, please leave them down in the comments below. And thank you for watching.